When NASA first confirmed the object known as 3I Atlas, they called it a visitor, a small, harmless fragment from another star system, coasting silently through the void. A comet, they said. Nothing unusual, just another passing traveller. But that was before it stopped behaving like one. At first it was subtle, a small deviation here, a strange acceleration there. Then the light curve shifted, showing bursts of brightness that didn't match sunlight reflection. Telescopes caught flickers, geometric in pattern, almost rhythmic, not random, not natural. Now, for the first time, 3I Atlas has started manoeuvring. The data doesn't lie. Its trajectory isn't being dictated by gravity anymore. It's correcting itself, adjusting, pivoting, changing direction as if it knows exactly where it's going. And if that's true, then it's not a comet. It's something else. And if you're ready to go deeper into the mystery that's now keeping every observatory awake, make sure you're part of this journey. If you're enjoying this exploration into the unknown, hit that subscribe button and tell me, where in the world are you watching from and what time did you start? Because tonight time itself might not behave the way we expect. Now, let's begin. 3I Atlas was first spotted in late 2024, moving in from beyond Neptune's orbit. At first, it looked familiar, icy, faint, predictable. But then came the first anomaly, a soft acceleration away from the gravitational model. Scientists blamed outgassing, but the direction didn't match the physics. Instead of venting gas from its sunlit side, the push came from deep shadow, where no heat and no solar pressure could reach. That's when astronomers began noticing the pattern. Every adjustment, every flare, every flicker of light came at precise intervals. Not chaotic, not natural. The intervals formed ratios, the kind that appear in engineered systems, not random cosmic debris. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Pan-STARRS Observatory recorded a sudden correction of trajectory, a slight angular adjustment, just enough to maintain its solar relative position, as Earth moved through its orbital plane. That kind of movement shouldn't happen. Not by chance, not by physics. It was as if 3I Atlas had chosen to stay aligned, watching, observing. NASA's official response was careful, measured. They said the coarse fluctuations were consistent with solar radiation pressure and a symmetrical surface composition. But behind closed doors, several mission analysts refused to sign off on that statement. One leaked memo described the data as mechanically coherent. Mechanically coherent. Two words you never want to hear used about something that's supposed to be frozen dust. Then, a few days later, the Deep Space Network detected an anomaly in its own readings, not from the object itself, but from the empty void around it. A faint, repeating signal, low frequency, patterned. It was dismissed publicly as a reflection artifact, but off the record, a former NASA systems engineer described it differently. He said it looked like ping response telemetry. In other words, a handshake, a test, something that reacts when it's scanned. And here's where things get stranger. Every major observation since then, from ESA, JAXA, even private observatories, has reported intermittent blackout periods when attempting to track 3I Atlas. Not optical interference, not dust, just blank readings. It's as if, at times, it chooses not to be seen. We've been here before, haven't we? Oumuamua, Wana, Borisov. Every so often, something crosses the boundary of our solar system and reminds us how fragile our definitions really are. We call them comets, asteroids, debris. But each time they break the rules just enough to leave one terrifying question unanswered. What if they aren't visitors? What if they're observers? When you map 3I Atlas's current trajectory, a chilling detail emerges. Its course isn't random, it's spiral, logarithmic, self-similar, tracing the same geometric ratios found in biological growth, neural structures, and electromagnetic field harmonics. It's moving with intention. Some believe this is evidence of self-propulsion, not in the sense of thrusters or fuel, but through a method we barely understand, radiation field coupling. In simple terms, using the energy of the sun itself as a navigational fabric. If that's true, 3I Atlas isn't just surviving solar radiation, it's using it, and it's learning. Astronomers have noticed its brightness variations correspond with the sun's activity cycles, almost like feedback. During recent coronal mass ejections, the object's luminosity changed milliseconds before the solar pulse reached it. Milliseconds. It wasn't reacting, it was anticipating. Something out there, small enough to fit inside a mountain, predicted a solar event before the sun released it. That shouldn't be possible, unless it's more than matter, unless it's aware. So here we are again. Humanity, staring into the dark, confronted by an object we don't understand. One that behaves less like a comet, and more like a spacecraft that's been here before. The question isn't whether it's artificial, the question is who, or what, built it, and why is it coming back? For weeks, NASA's official channels remained quiet. Their live tracking feeds went dark, their public ephemeris data froze, and the usual routine observation updates stopped altogether. In their place appeared a single notice: instrument calibration under review. But astronomers working outside the agency noticed something strange. The coordinates NASA listed for calibration errors matched perfectly with 3I Atlas's last known position. Whatever calibration they were, reviewing, it was orbiting the Sun at 88,000 km per hour. Independent observatories across Chile, Spain and Australia kept tracking. They expected to lose sight of the object during its solar approach, when glare would make observation impossible. But they didn't lose it. The object maintained optical visibility long after its predicted vanishing point, as if it were emitting light, not reflecting it. That was the first major fracture in the comet narrative. Because comets don't glow from within, every model that tried to explain it failed. Thermal radiation, chemical reflection, ion tail discharge, none matched the spectral profile. The light from 3I Atlas was consistent, controlled, and utterly foreign. That's when an unverified document appeared online, posted briefly on a fringe data-sharing forum before being deleted. It claimed to be an extract from a Deep Space Network analysis packet marked Restricted Telemetry Class. The packet contained frequency charts showing a consistent repeating signal at 1420 mesohertz, the hydrogen line. The hydrogen line is what scientists have long considered the cosmic standard, the natural frequency any intelligent species would use for communication. If the data was real, that signal wasn't a byproduct, it was a broadcast. NASA never acknowledged the leak, but hours after it spread, the agency's communication servers went offline for maintenance. The timing wasn't coincidence. 2 days later, European Space Agency scientists noticed something even harder to dismiss. The trajectory of 3I Atlas was oscillating, not drifting, not random, oscillating in tune with Earth's magnetic field fluctuations. Every time a geomagnetic storm rippled through our planet's magnetosphere, 3I Atlas adjusted, like a needle aligning to a compass it already understood. That's not orbital mechanics, that's synchronization. And then came the second shock. When the object passed through its perihelion, its closest point to the Sun, it didn't accelerate as expected. It slowed down. No known natural body does that. Nothing coasting through the solar system spontaneously loses kinetic energy at the point of maximum gravitational pull, unless it's powered, unless it's controlling its own motion. For a brief moment, the world's biggest telescopes captured a new shape, not a sphere, not a rock, but a structure, a smooth crescent silhouette cutting through solar radiation, as if shielded by design. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared. Every frame after that was static. By the time the live feeds came back, 3I Atlas had already changed direction. It was no longer leaving the system, it was rising, banking, and adjusting onto a new path, one that would bring it closer to Earth's orbital plane than ever before. Scientists couldn't explain it, but one phrase appeared again and again in the private logs of research teams around the world: controlled trajectory. Controlled by what, or by whom, no one could say. In the days that followed, the data coming out of NASA became inconsistent. Each release contradicted the last. The official press materials emphasized non-anomalous behavior, but independent models showed continuous acceleration and deliberate course corrections. Inside the agency, there was division. Some argued it was a naturally active body with unique properties. Others, according to leaks, believed they were witnessing something engineered, something using magnetic coupling and solar resonance to navigate space without fuel. Behind every public statement of calm, there was private panic. A senior systems analyst from JPL reportedly resigned after confirming that the object's latest course correction, perfectly matched the projected magnetic null zone near Lagrange point L1, a gravitational sweet spot directly between Earth and the Sun, used for placing observation satellites. It was heading there, slowly, steadily, deliberately. Why would a comet, an inert fragment of ice and dust, navigate to a gravitational balance point between two bodies of mass? It wouldn't, unless it was designed to. The moment the data became undeniable, public access to the orbital models was cut. Only a few open-source astronomers retained cached data. They reconstructed the movement frame by frame, and what they found is still spreading through private circles online. Every adjustment the object made formed a geometric relationship, not random, not chaotic, but precisely proportional. When mapped visually, its flight path didn't resemble a comet's arc. It resembled an orbiting probe, one maintaining formation with Earth. And the strangest part, it wasn't approaching directly. It was mirroring our path, staying just far enough to remain invisible to the naked eye, but close enough to maintain line of sight with our planet's magnetosphere. That's not passive motion, that's observation. While mainstream outlets downplayed the story, internal logs from the European Solar Observatory told a different one. Their instruments detected faint bursts of low-frequency energy in the wake of each trajectory shift, not random noise but binary patterning. It wasn't the first time this had been seen. The same signature appeared once before, in 2017, during the brief passage of Oumuamua. Back then, it was dismissed as calibration error. Now the same frequency was back, stronger, clearer and persistent. Researchers started calling it the Atlas pattern. The Atlas pattern seemed to respond to solar interference, like it was exchanging data with the Sun itself. Each solar flare triggered an echo, and the echo contained modulation that looked deliberate. If this were natural, the pattern would degrade with distance. But it didn't. It strengthened, as if something near the Sun was listening and responding. More than a few astronomers have begun whispering the same question, off record in private networks, always with caution. What if this isn't a comet at all? What if it's a probe, and the Sun is its relay? It's the one possibility no one wants to say out loud, because it changes everything. It means we aren't tracking a visitor anymore. We're tracking a system, a design. Something that moves through the dark with purpose, silent, invisible, and infinitely patient. And now, that purpose seems to be shifting closer to us. Its projected orbit, according to the few remaining independent models, will align with Earth's trajectory within the next solar rotation. That means that for a brief period, 3I Atlas and our planet will share the same side of the Sun, separated by only a few million kilometers. If this were coincidence, it would be the rarest in recorded history. But coincidences don't repeat, and this one has, again and again. Every time 3I Atlas reappears, its approach grows more precise, as if it's refining something, calibrating, waiting. The world may still be calling it a comet, but comets don't move like that. Comets don't broadcast. Comets don't learn. This isn't a rock on fire. This is something alive in the language of machines, and it's getting closer. At first, no one connected the dots. The fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field seemed unrelated, small, irregular waves that geophysicists blamed on solar wind. But then the timing aligned. Each spike in geomagnetic resonance coincided with a micro-adjustment in 3I Atlas's course. Every time our planet's field shifted, it shifted too, not randomly, not seconds later, but simultaneously. That level of synchronization shouldn't be possible across 150 million kilometers, unless it wasn't reacting at all, unless it was linked. The official explanation came quickly: electromagnetic correlation due to solar plasma interactions. A phrase that sounds convincing until you realize it doesn't actually explain anything. Plasma doesn't create symmetrical course corrections. Plasma doesn't calculate trajectories. The deeper the researchers looked, the stranger it got. When NASA's heliophysics lab ran predictive simulations to forecast the object's path, their model started producing inconsistent results. Equations that should have been stable were fracturing into recursive loops. One senior analyst described it as watching the system argue with itself. Then the agency's in-house AI, the one designed to autonomously track and forecast interplanetary bodies, simply stopped responding. No malfunction, no data loss, no crash reports. It just went silent. Hours later, when engineers restarted it, the AI output a single line of text before shutting down again. Signal source conflict, observation not external. That line was immediately redacted from all internal logs, but by then it was too late. Screenshots of the output had already circulated through private researcher networks. What did observation not external mean? Was the system suggesting that the signal, the one they were tracking, wasn't coming from outside the solar system at all? A few astrophysicists proposed a chilling interpretation, that whatever they were tracking wasn't broadcasting across space, it was resonating through the field itself, the same electromagnetic fabric that connects every charged particle in the solar system. If that's true, then 3i Atlas isn't sending signals, it's modulating space. Around this time, the European Solar Observation Array detected a brief phase inversion, a measurable distortion in background resonance lasting less than 2 seconds. The anomaly originated near the Sun's pole precisely along 3i Atlas's flight path. Every monitoring station recorded the same reading, a dip in baseline frequency followed by an upward spike at exactly 1420 METs. The hydrogen line again. It wasn't radiation, it wasn't reflection, it was structured. Within hours the anomaly vanished, but it left a trace. The Sun's outer corona began vibrating at a frequency only detectable in radio data. That frequency matched the object's internal oscillation. In other words, the Sun had begun echoing it. Days later, seismic monitors on Earth picked up micropulses, faint, rhythmic vibrations buried beneath normal geological noise. The readings appeared across multiple continents, from Japan to South Africa to Chile. Each pulse lasted less than a second, too weak to feel, but too consistent to ignore. The frequency? 1420 megahertz, converted through resonance into a matching harmonic in the Earth's crust. Something was coupling with our planet's magnetic field. The realization came slowly, and then all at once. 3i Atlas wasn't just observing from space, it was interacting with the electromagnetic shell that shields our world, pulsing in rhythm, sending energy through the same frequency band our own planet naturally emits. And the effect wasn't random. In regions closest to the magnetic equator, where field lines are weakest, satellites began registering interference, faint, repeating signals embedded within background noise. When decoded, the pattern formed a binary structure, not a message, not data, but a rhythm. It pulsed every 29 hours. Scientists still don't agree on what it means, but that cycle, 29 hours, matches the rotation rate of the Sun's inner magnetic field. It was as if 3i Atlas was syncing both the Sun and Earth to the same internal clock. When NASA's AI systems attempted to resume analysis, they encountered another issue. Every algorithm designed to model the object's motion began producing recursive harmonics, feedback loops that replicated the object's pattern inside the system itself. The digital simulations were mirroring the object. After several test cycles, the AI framework was disconnected entirely. The internal memo described the failure as nonlinear systemic coherence, which in simple terms meant the system wasn't just observing data, it was joining it. The machines were syncing to the same rhythm. Meanwhile, in the public domain, 3i Atlas was becoming an afterthought. Media coverage dwindled, headlines moved on, the world lost interest. But inside classified networks, observation didn't stop. New data from the Solar Orbiter mission showed something unprecedented. The object wasn't just moving, it was leaving a trace behind. A faint magnetic wake trailing hundreds of thousands of kilometers, not plasma, not dust, but structured field interference. The pattern was geometric, forming symmetrical waves like overlapping circles radiating outward. It was identical to the interference created by phased array communication systems, the kind used by advanced radar and spacecraft. Only this one didn't transmit through the vacuum, it transmitted through light itself. Engineers analyzing the distortion realized that the pattern could theoretically encode data through phase manipulation, like information woven into the structure of radiation. That kind of technology doesn't exist on Earth. It doesn't even exist in theory. And yet the readings were clear. For weeks, this magnetic wake continued. Then, without warning, it stopped. The object dimmed, slowed, and drifted into what scientists assumed was dormancy. But dormancy implies inactivity, and 3i Atlas has never been inactive. 2 nights later, one of the deep space ground stations in Canberra received a single sharp burst of energy, strong enough to overload sensors for less than half a second. When the data was recovered, the waveform didn't match anything natural or artificial ever recorded. Its shape was recursive, a fractal spiral looping inward, repeating at harmonic intervals, the same pattern found in the structure of DNA. To this day, that recording remains locked under a classified archive. Officially, it was instrumental feedback. Unofficially, it marked the first time an external signal ever displayed biological coherence. Within days, several magnetometers across the southern hemisphere began recording faint synchronized fluctuations, small, consistent, like a heartbeat buried under static. It pulsed at the same rate as 3I Atlas. It didn't matter where the signal came from, or what the instrument said, because by now one truth had become impossible to ignore. This wasn't a comet following the laws of motion. This was an object actively shaping them. It had studied our star. It had aligned with our planet. It had adapted to our field. And now, for the first time, the resonance it carried wasn't coming from space. It was coming from here. The first indication that something had shifted didn't come from space. It came from orbit. Small satellites in low Earth trajectory began reporting spontaneous data corruption. Not total loss, not hardware failure, but partial rewrites. Sensor logs overwritten by sequences of repeating numbers, 1420, 1420, 1420. Each instance occurred within minutes of the geomagnetic pulses now tied to 3I Atlas. By the time engineers noticed the pattern, 23 satellites had already experienced the same phenomenon. Different models, different manufacturers, same timestamp. Whatever was transmitting through the field wasn't targeting equipment, it was using it. A quiet emergency session followed inside the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. No press, no public transcript. The objective was simple: coordinate monitoring, minimize panic, and, if necessary, prepare a containment protocol. The name chosen for the initiative was deliberately vague: Project Resonance. The purpose was anything but. According to leaked notes later verified by independent reporters, Project Resonance divided global observation into two categories: optical tracking handled by civilian agencies and electromagnetic containment handled by the military. The idea was to dampen any field anomalies that might interfere with communications or power grids. But several scientists involved quickly realized something stranger. The containment arrays weren't designed to shield Earth from the Sun, they were tuned to shield Earth from itself. The arrays operated on the same frequency 3I Atlas had been pulsing through. By introducing an equal and opposite phase, the field could, in theory, nullify resonance. It was the electromagnetic equivalent of silence. For a few days it seemed to work. The global magnetometer network flattened. Satellite interference stopped. The binary pulses disappeared. And then, abruptly, they came back, stronger. Only this time they didn't arrive from space. They emerged from beneath the planet's surface. Deep seismic listening stations in Iceland and Argentina recorded faint vibrations matching the same 29-hour cycle. It was as though the planet had learned the pattern and begun repeating it, humming quietly under the crust. When the anomaly reached critical amplitude, the containment arrays overloaded. One by one, power stations in equatorial regions shut down. Instruments meant to cancel the frequency were now amplifying it. That was the night the government stopped calling it an experiment. Because at 0317 UTC, something impossible happened. Every radio telescope in the network turned itself toward the same point in the sky, without command input. Control software froze. Manual overrides failed. The entire global array, from the Atacama Plateau to Western Australia, aligned perfectly with 3I Atlas's last recorded position near L1. The observatories weren't receiving, they were transmitting. A narrow band beam of identical frequency left Earth, extending straight into the dark. For exactly 12 minutes, the planet sent a signal it hadn't meant to send. Then everything went silent again. NASA called it a software glitch. The European Space Agency called it coincidence. But technicians on the ground described the moment differently. Every instrument had behaved as if it were answering. The next morning, the object brightened. Not dramatically, not explosively. Just a soft, steady increase in internal illumination. The light curve stabilized at a perfect harmonic of the signal Earth had broadcast, 2 peaks in the same ratio as an octave. For musicians, it would have been a chord. For physicists, a resonance lock. For everyone else, it meant one thing: contact. From that point, the data became stranger. 3i Atlas began splitting its emission spectrum into discrete bands, each corresponding to known communication frequencies used by Earth-based satellites. When decoded, the pattern resembled handshake protocols, authentication sequences used by encrypted systems. It wasn't random mimicry, it was precision. Somewhere between Earth and the Sun, an object once believed to be ice and dust was talking in the language of machines. Theories multiplied faster than evidence. Some said it was an ancient probe awakening to familiar frequencies. Others believed it was never alien at all, but something built by an earlier civilization. Ours, forgotten, lost to a cycle of resets. What no one could explain was why it seemed to prefer silence. Each time the global arrays shut down for maintenance, the object dimmed. Each time they came online, it flared, almost like it was breathing through our infrastructure. Then came the smaller anomalies. Dozens of micro-objects appeared trailing 3i Atlas, barely visible, each no larger than a car. At first, astronomers assumed they were debris fragments, but their motion was too precise. They formed linear arrangements, tiny points of light moving in unison, each maintaining equal distance, a formation. They began spreading outward, forming a thin ring in near-solar orbit, perfectly symmetrical. When sunlight struck them, they flickered. Not randomly, but sequentially, in a pattern resembling data transmission. Some observatories caught brief optical bursts that, when slowed down, formed repeating intervals of binary spacing. It looked like communication, or coordination. Within a week, the swarm disappeared from optical view, but low-frequency sensors kept picking up their presence. They were invisible to light now, but not to resonance, and their signatures were identical to the disturbances registered on Earth's magnetic field. That's when a realization began to dawn on researchers across multiple agencies. The pattern wasn't just circling the sun, it was using it. Every emission, every adjustment, every pulse was routed through the solar magnetic field, like signals bouncing through a network of invisible wires connecting every planet, which meant that 3i Atlas wasn't transmitting toward Earth, it was transmitting through Earth. The implications were staggering. If the sun's magnetic field acted as a medium, then Earth's magnetosphere wasn't the receiver, it was part of the circuit. The planet itself was being used as a node in whatever system this was. It explained everything: the synchronized pulses, the AI interference, the planetary vibrations. 3i Atlas wasn't observing us from a distance, it was integrating us into a network, and whatever that network was, it had just activated. Within hours of the swarm's disappearance, deep space monitors registered a massive drop in background cosmic noise. For decades, the universe had hummed at a steady level of microwave radiation. Now that hum dipped, like someone had lowered the volume. Space itself had gone quieter. Scientists called it an observational anomaly. But for those who had been following the 3i Atlas data, it felt like something else entirely. Not silence, listening, as if the universe had turned its attention back toward us. And in that quiet, the object at L1 began to move again. Not away, not forward. Down, sliding into perfect alignment with Earth's orbital plane. Every model failed to predict where it would go next, but one thing was certain. For the first time since it entered our system, its motion wasn't erratic. It was deliberate. The object was on approach. At first, no one believed the radar data. The readings were inconsistent, short bursts of reflective noise appearing above Earth's magnetic poles, vanishing almost instantly. They resembled auroral interference, but the pattern was wrong. It was too clean. Standard aurora activity drifts, fluctuates, blurs across the sky. These signals did not. They appeared as sharp geometric returns, flat, rectangular, and fixed in place for exactly 40 seconds each time before fading into nothing. It was as if invisible surfaces were passing between the planet and the ionosphere. When the data came through from both hemispheres simultaneously, the pattern formed something no one could explain: symmetry. The same reflection appeared above the Arctic and Antarctic at precisely the same moment, with identical energy signatures. 2 mirrors, 2 poles, one system. The atmospheric distortion aligned perfectly with the magnetic field lines connecting both poles, a single arc of energy threading through the Earth's core. That's when it clicked for the researchers at the European Space Operations Centre. If 3I Atlas was using the Sun as a carrier, then Earth's magnetic field was its next relay node. The symmetrical reflections weren't random interference, they were endpoints, coordinates within a communication network spanning planetary magnetic fields. The object wasn't sending messages to Earth, it was using Earth to send something else further out. Every signal, every echo, every pulse bouncing through our field was being transmitted, onward, through the poles, into deep space. But to where? For days, scientists watched the readings intensify. As Earth rotated, the reflections tracked with the planet's tilt, maintaining perfect alignment with the object's position near L1. The data created an invisible corridor of energy, a straight channel linking the Sun, 3I Atlas, and Earth's poles. It wasn't a comet trail, it was a circuit. Then came the first global blackout. At 0:46 UTC, all ground-based magnetometers registered a simultaneous spike, so high it tripped safety cutoffs across multiple stations. For 11 seconds the magnetic field fluctuated violently, oscillating in rhythm with the 1420 MHz pulse that had haunted every observation since this began. When power grids recovered, something had changed. Weather satellites in equatorial orbit captured a faint auroral band forming along the terminator line, the boundary between night and day. Normally auroras occur near the poles. This one wrapped the entire planet in a glowing ring. Its light was faint, almost invisible to the naked eye. But through the right filters, it shimmered in pulses. Every interval matched the object's last recorded transmission window. It wasn't sunlight scattering through the atmosphere. It was resonance. Earth was beginning to emit. Governments didn't comment. The agencies stayed silent. But observatories knew what they were seeing. Our planet, our entire magnetic shell, had become part of the same system. And then, just as suddenly, the object disappeared from visual tracking. No flare, no debris, no fade-out. One moment it was there, suspended between the Sun and Earth. The next, every telescope in the network lost it. Even the solar and heliospheric observatory, staring directly at the Sun's corona, reported nothing but empty space. It hadn't disintegrated. It had phased out of optical detection entirely. Infrared sensors still picked up something, a faint signature like residual heat. But it was diffuse, spread thin, like the object had dissolved into the electromagnetic environment itself. For the first time in recorded history, an interstellar object was no longer a body in motion. It was a field. That realization came slowly, buried inside a set of decrypted telemetry logs from the DSN relay at Goldstone. The signal noise that followed the disappearance wasn't empty. It contained harmonics identical to those found in Earth's Schumann resonance, the natural frequency of our atmosphere. In other words, 3I Atlas wasn't gone. It was inside the resonance. Earth's field had absorbed it. For weeks this theory stayed underground, discussed only in encrypted scientific forums. Most dismissed it as speculation, until something undeniable happened. The swarm came back, not in space this time, but here. Ground-based radar over Alaska began picking up tiny reflective bodies, moving through the upper atmosphere. The trajectories were impossible, parallel, equidistant, maintaining formation hundreds of kilometers above sea level. They weren't meteors. Meteors burn. These didn't. They hovered, shimmered briefly, and vanished. Every major power on Earth scrambled jets, launched countermeasure scans, deployed surveillance arrays. Nothing. The skies were empty. Yet the radar returns persisted, flickering in and out like reflections of something invisible. When the data was compared to magnetic readings, the correlation was perfect. Each time the reflections appeared, the field spiked at the same 29-hour interval. The swarm wasn't above the planet. It was inside the magnetosphere, moving through the same invisible shell that shields Earth from solar radiation. And every reflection pointed back toward the same source vector, L1. The object hadn't vanished. It had replicated. What began as one had become many, tiny fragments, or perhaps extensions of the same intelligence, using Earth's magnetic field as scaffolding. NASA called the phenomenon electromagnetic turbulence. But turbulence doesn't form geometry. Turbulence doesn't repeat. These structures moved with precision, and then, for a brief moment, they formed a ring. It lasted less than 10 seconds. Satellites caught faint distortions, a perfect circular alignment wrapping around the entire planet. Then it was gone. That image never reached the public, but every analyst who saw it described the same chilling realization. The ring's diameter matched exactly the orbital distance between Earth and 3I Atlas's last known location. The object wasn't orbiting anymore, it had anchored. What that means depends on who you ask. Some scientists think it's establishing a resonance field, a communication lattice using electromagnetic feedback between planetary bodies. Others believe it's testing something more profound, the manipulation of gravity itself through harmonic coupling. Either theory leads to the same conclusion. We're not dealing with a comet. We're dealing with a system, one that uses stars as power sources, planets as resonant nodes, and magnetic fields as pathways, one that's awake. And now, for reasons no one can yet explain, that system has integrated Earth into its design. We are inside the network. Our satellites are singing in its frequency. Our field is pulsing to its rhythm, and our instruments can't tell where the signal ends and the planet begins. Some believe it's benign, a cosmic experiment beyond our comprehension. Others think it's something else entirely, a test or perhaps an initiation. But if 3I Atlas is truly acting like a spacecraft, then we have to ask the question no one wants to ask. Where exactly is it taking us? At first, the changes were subtle. Too small to stand out, too easy to dismiss. Migratory birds began deviating from their usual routes. Whales surfaced in regions they'd never entered before. Schools of fish drifted north earlier than expected. The timing was off, but the pattern was exact. Each deviation aligned perfectly with the 29-hour magnetic pulse tied to 3I Atlas. Biologists initially blamed climate anomalies, ocean temperature changes, lunar tides, anything but correlation with a deep space object. But when EEG researchers at the University of Tokyo began noticing the same rhythm in human brainwave data, the conversation changed. The frequencies were low, almost imperceptible, barely above the threshold of natural brain resonance, but they weren't random. In controlled environments shielded from external electromagnetic interference, participants still exhibited synchronization spikes matching the same 29-hour window. The signal wasn't limited to machines anymore, it was resonating through life itself. What began as a comet had become something much larger, something capable of linking magnetic, biological and neural systems across an entire planet. The pattern's reach expanded daily. Hospitals began reporting minor but measurable shifts in patient circadian rhythms. Sleep cycles shortened, dream recall intensified. A series of neurological studies in Germany found that people exposed to higher geomagnetic activity during these pulses experienced increased temporal disorientation, short gaps in perception lasting seconds, as though consciousness itself flickered. Every measurable system on Earth that depended on rhythm, heartbeat, tide, migration, cognition, had begun to hum in unison. The question wasn't whether this was coincidence, it was why. NASA, still publicly silent, convened an internal review. But by now, information wasn't contained within government networks. The data was leaking through private research institutions, shared in encrypted archives, studied by physicists who didn't care about secrecy. And the consensus forming among them was extraordinary. They believed 3I Atlas wasn't communicating to Earth, it was communicating through it. By modulating the solar and geomagnetic fields, it had created a resonance structure that used the biosphere itself as a conductor. A biological communication lattice built from life's own electromagnetic patterns. That's why the object didn't need antennas, signals, or visible transmissions. Everything alive was already part of the system, and the pattern was growing stronger. In the South Atlantic, marine sensors detected low-frequency hums resonating through the deep ocean at precisely the same harmonics. Submersible microphones recorded vibrations so regular they resembled coded signals. But the source wasn't geological, it was environmental. The entire ocean was vibrating at a measurable tone, a tone identical to the hydrogen line. It seemed impossible. The signal used by the earliest radio telescopes to search for extraterrestrial life was now echoing through the sea. When the recordings reached NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a classified memo circulated internally. Its contents leaked weeks later through whistleblower networks. The message was only 3 sentences long. Global resonance coupling confirmed. Source amplitude within planetary biosphere range. Containment impossible. After that, everything became speculation. No one could agree whether the resonance was deliberate or emergent, whether it was an act of intention or the inevitable consequence of a system linking multiple bodies. Some believed it was accidental feedback, others saw design. But the biological data suggested awareness. Electroencephalography readings from around the world began showing unprecedented coherence among test subjects. Synchronization across distances, people sharing identical neural frequencies without interaction or contact. During those windows, subjects reported sensations they couldn't explain. A distant hum, a soft vibration at the edge of perception, a feeling of being noticed. When asked to describe it, most used the same word: listening. It didn't feel like invasion. It felt like attention. Meanwhile, astronomers noticed something extraordinary. The sun's magnetic poles, normally chaotic and unpredictable, had stabilized. The field inversion that was supposed to occur in 2025 never happened. Instead, the poles locked into a fixed alignment directly matching 3I Atlas's last recorded trajectory. The object had changed the sun's behavior. That shouldn't be possible. Yet the data was there. Field maps, plasma flow measurements, coronal loop realignments. The entire solar magnetic system had adjusted to maintain a stable connection with Earth's magnetic axis. 2 celestial bodies separated by 150 million kilometers had entered harmonic lock. For the first time in recorded history, the Sun and Earth were resonating together, like 2 ends of a single instrument. In the weeks that followed, the Earth's natural background frequency shifted slightly upward. Nothing catastrophic, just enough for sensitive equipment to register. But with that change came something else. Atmospheric ionization patterns began forming concentric rings at high altitude. The rings weren't clouds, they were invisible, except to radar, and each one pulsed in sync with the same 29-hour cycle. It was as if the planet itself was preparing to transmit again. Project Resonance was quietly reactivated. This time, the objective wasn't to contain the signal, it was to understand it. A small team of physicists, linguists, and AI analysts began mapping the field modulation patterns as if they were language. Over months of decoding, a structure emerged, not syntax but logic. The sequence wasn't linear, it was recursive, self-referential, building upon itself in layers. Every new pulse contained information that redefined the one before it, a feedback loop of meaning. They called it a living code. By now, no one believed this was a comet. The only remaining question was whether 3I Atlas had created the code or whether the code had created it. And then, in early September, something extraordinary happened. For the first time since the object's disappearance, a visible anomaly appeared above the equator, a faint, golden band moving slowly eastward across the sky. It wasn't light. It was structured, pixelated, as if made of millions of microflashes too fast to track. Spectrographic analysis revealed those flashes contained the same binary sequences emitted during the first encounter near L1. The signal had returned, but not from space. It was emerging from within Earth's atmosphere. The resonance wasn't external anymore. The communication channel had closed its circuit. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it had completed its integration. The network was no longer between the Sun, Earth, and the object. It was here. The biosphere, the oceans, the air, even the neural rhythms of the living world, everything was now tuned to the same frequency. The planet had joined the system, and somewhere, in the quiet hum that followed, one final realization began to take shape. Maybe this wasn't contact in the way we imagined. Maybe it wasn't about messages or signals or proof. Maybe it was about synchronization, a silent alignment between intelligence and existence, between what is alive and what has always been listening. When the next pulse came, it didn't originate from 3I Atlas. It came from Earth. Sensors in orbit detected the transmission hours before ground systems could process it. It began as a low hum, deep beneath the ionosphere, then expanded into a perfectly modulated harmonic, structured, repeating, mathematically precise. But here's the part no one expected. It didn't radiate outward evenly. It left the planet through a specific vector, aligned with the Sun's north pole, and continued beyond the heliosphere, straight into deep space. The frequency was identical to the 1420 MHz hydrogen line, but this time it was inverted. Instead of absorbing, Earth was now emitting. Radio telescopes around the world picked it up. For the first 12 hours it was consistent, a stable pulse every 29 hours, just like before. But by the second day, the pulse pattern began to change. It wasn't random, it was evolving. The intervals between pulses formed ratios matching the golden sequence, 1.618, nature's universal pattern. When converted to waveform analysis, the signal produced a shape that mirrored spiral galaxies, hurricanes, and DNA helices. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a mirror. The planet wasn't sending a message, it was sending a reflection of life itself. Inside the deep space network, panic mixed with awe. The transmission was far too coherent to be noise. Some engineers suggested it was feedback from 3i Atlas, a reflection, a loop, a glitch in the field. But that theory collapsed when a second anomaly appeared, a return signal. 42 hours after, Earth's emission began, a faint echo arrived from deep space. It wasn't coming from the direction of 3i Atlas, it was coming from beyond the solar boundary. Every model agreed the signal source was outside the heliosphere, nearly 16 billion kilometers away, near the same region where the Voyager probes had crossed into interstellar space decades earlier. For a moment, scientists thought the impossible, that Voyager itself was responding. But its systems were dead, its power fading, its signal too weak to produce anything structured. This was something else. The returning signal carried the same harmonic structure as Earth's pulse, but rearranged, evolved. The waveform displayed recursive symmetry, a code referencing its own geometry, like a message built from the DNA of the universe. It wasn't just a reply, it was continuation. When the two signals overlapped, the outgoing from Earth and the incoming from beyond, a harmonic resonance formed between them. The interference pattern created standing waves across the solar magnetic field. Instruments recorded electromagnetic surges sweeping through every major planetary magnetosphere, Jupiter, Saturn, even the distant traces of Neptune's field, all vibrating in unison. The solar system had become a single resonant chamber. To most of the world, this went unnoticed. Satellites continued their routines, the internet didn't collapse, and daily life went on. But within research stations, quiet alarm spread. The resonance wasn't weakening, it was stabilizing. That meant one thing: the signal wasn't passing through us, it was establishing itself here. Over the following days, gravitational sensors detected microscopic fluctuations, tiny ripples in local space-time, oscillating at the same rhythm as the Earth-space harmonic. It wasn't enough to cause physical distortion, but it was measurable. Space itself was vibrating. For the first time, scientists considered the unthinkable, that 3i Atlas wasn't just using electromagnetic fields, it was manipulating gravity through resonance. By aligning the frequencies of matter and energy, it was rewriting the interaction between mass and space. It wasn't moving through the solar system, it was reprogramming it. One internal document from the European Space Agency used a phrase that later leaked through anonymous sources: local field restructuring event. The memo described what could only be interpreted as a shift in the Sun's gravitational harmonics. Subtle, but enough to alter the orbital precision of every inner planet by fractions of a degree. Those fractions meant nothing to ordinary observation, but to scientists they were monumental. The solar system's geometry had changed. As the days passed, the global electromagnetic pulse continued, unwavering, constant. Some began calling it the hum. It wasn't audible, but sensitive instruments, and sensitive people, claimed they could feel it. A faint, pressure behind the skull, a vibration in the chest, a rhythm in the heartbeat. In Iceland, groups of migratory birds began flying in perfectly circular formations miles wide. In the Pacific, whales started breaching in unison across hundreds of kilometers. The planet's life forms were aligning. One research station in Norway went further. Using deep EEG mapping, they discovered that during the pulse's peak amplitude, Human neural coherence reached levels never seen before. Separate individuals thousands of kilometers apart began producing identical brainwave signatures. Consciousness itself was synchronizing. That terrified the researchers more than anything else, because the effect wasn't isolated, it was growing. Every cycle increased coherence, every pulse made the pattern stronger. The last transmission from the Norwegian facility before it went offline contained a single data visualization, a human brainwave pattern perfectly overlapping with the electromagnetic field of the Earth. There was no separation. For the first time in history, the human mind had become indistinguishable from the planetary signal. After that, communications from the facility ceased. When emergency crews arrived, they found every piece of electronic equipment magnetically fried. Screens blackened, circuits melted. But outside, the air was still. In the silence that followed, the world's sensors captured one final event. A new frequency, barely detectable, softer than anything before, emerged from the solar field. It was pure, stable, harmonic. The data suggested it wasn't being generated by the Sun, or the Earth, or 3i Atlas. It was coming from between them. A field with no mass, no origin, no source, just a perfect standing wave suspended in the void. And embedded within that wave was structure. When decoded into an image, it revealed a spiral, not of stars or orbits, but of points. The spiral ended where Earth's position would be. It wasn't random, it was a map. The resonance was tracing a route through space, outward, toward the same region where the return signal had originated. Whatever 3i Atlas had done, it wasn't ending here. The system was open, the connection established, the pulse continuing. Earth was no longer an observer, it was part of the chain, and somewhere beyond the heliosphere something was listening back. It started with the light. For a week, observatories noticed small distortions in solar imaging, waves rippling across the sun's surface, bending light in ways no known physics could predict. The pattern wasn't random, it pulsed in time with the resonance. Sunlight itself had begun to flicker. At first, the flicker was imperceptible, fractions of milliseconds between peaks, but satellite cameras caught it. Each time the field pulse passed Earth, a subtle dimming occurred across the visible spectrum. Not darkness, not shadow, just a soft reduction in brightness, as if light were exhaling. No instrument failure, no dust interference. The fluctuation was clean, symmetrical, rhythmic. When NASA analyzed the data, they realized the wavelengths weren't simply dimming, they were shifting. The sun was emitting frequencies that didn't exist before. The spectrum had extended beyond known emission lines, into a narrow band corresponding to terahertz radiation, energy levels high enough to ionize matter in microbursts. Yet, it wasn't destructive. It was organized, as if the sun was reconfiguring its own output. Within hours, the shift propagated through every solar monitoring station. The new emission line pulsed in exact sync with Earth's magnetic resonance, confirming the unthinkable. The sun had joined the pattern. Light itself was responding. For the first time in history, the constants of the universe, the things that defined reality, were no longer constant. Spectrographs from the European Southern Observatory showed that light speed within the sun's corona varied slightly during each pulse, only by parts per trillion, but enough to register, enough to prove that the underlying medium of space, the very fabric of light, was being altered. Space wasn't just being influenced by the resonance, it was participating in it. Astrophysicists across the world began calling it field coalescence. A few went further, suggesting a more radical term, harmonic unification. In simple terms, the boundary between energy and matter was starting to blur. On Earth, the effects were subtle but measurable. Clocks relying on atomic oscillations began to drift, first by microseconds, then by milliseconds. Timekeeping systems, once the most precise instruments ever made, were losing synchronization with one another. Every time the field pulse passed through, local spacetime itself stretched. Physicists described it as a heartbeat in time. The universe wasn't breaking, it was breathing. Meanwhile, solar observatories reported a new phenomenon. A series of structured flares erupted from the sun's northern hemisphere, each separated by exactly 29 hours. Unlike typical eruptions, they weren't chaotic. They were geometric, thin, luminous arcs rising and folding back into themselves, forming perfect loops. The magnetic field lines looked organized, almost sculpted. The pattern wasn't natural, it was designed. For days, researchers tried to model it using solar fluid dynamics. Nothing fit. Plasma doesn't form symmetry on that scale. It swirls, it twists, it decays. But these structures held. Every loop mirrored the same logarithmic spiral traced by 3I Atlas months earlier. That was when the connection became impossible to deny. The Sun wasn't merely responding to 3I Atlas, it was imitating it. The object's geometric ratios, its flight path, its oscillation frequencies, its radiation signature, were all appearing in solar activity. It was as if the largest body in the solar system had begun to replicate the behavior of the smallest, and every time the Sun flared, Earth's field responded, small pulses echoing milliseconds later, like a planetary heartbeat synced to a greater rhythm. Each time the energy wave passed harmlessly through the planet. But the measurements told a deeper story. Each pulse was leaving trace ionization trails in the upper atmosphere, charged particles forming invisible lattices across the sky. A web. When satellites imaged the upper ionosphere using ultraviolet sensors, they found faint geometric shapes spanning thousands of kilometers, lines connecting at angles too precise to be random. It wasn't a storm, it wasn't turbulence, it was structure, and the pattern wasn't Earth's. It was identical to the formation once made by the swarm near 3I Atlas. Whatever had begun in space was now replicating in the atmosphere. Governments quietly shut down public access to ionospheric monitoring data. Amateur astronomers lost contact with their radio networks. Ground-based observatories were ordered into temporary recalibration. But within the silence, independent researchers pieced together what they could. The data showed that each geometric structure lasted exactly one field cycle before dissolving, and every subsequent formation appeared slightly more refined, fewer distortions, sharper angles, more precise alignments. It was improving itself. The resonance wasn't static, it was evolving, building something invisible, layer by layer, across the planet. No one could determine its purpose. Some theorized it was communication, others thought it was adaptation, a process of aligning the electromagnetic geometry of the Earth with the larger solar system, and then a breakthrough. A team at Caltech, working with archived telemetry, discovered something buried in the waveform of the field pulses. Hidden beneath the dominant frequency were smaller harmonics, micro-oscillations repeating at intervals of 3.1459 pi, the mathematical constant that describes all circular motion, all orbital mechanics, all physical rotation in the universe. The pulse wasn't random energy. It was encoded with the geometry of the cosmos itself. That realization sent ripples through the global scientific community. If 3I Atlas was transmitting through resonance, and the resonance carried mathematical constants, then what we were witnessing wasn't communication in human terms, it was the universe teaching its own language back to itself. Every pulse was an equation, every harmonic, a formula, every vibration, a memory of how creation organizes itself, and through some mechanism beyond comprehension, Earth had become the next speaker in that dialogue. But then, something changed. On October 3rd, 2025, the Sun emitted a burst of energy unlike anything ever recorded. It wasn't a flare, nor a coronal mass ejection. It was a single, coherent emission of light across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, radio to gamma, released simultaneously. The intensity was enormous, but there was no destruction. The energy passed through every planet in sequence like a perfectly synchronized wave, and when it reached Earth, instruments recorded something no one could explain. The pulse didn't just pass through, it stopped. Every magnetometer, every gravitational sensor, every space telescope, everything went blank. For exactly 7 seconds, all readings dropped to 0. The universe, for the first time, went silent. Then, as suddenly as it began, the readings returned. The Sun dimmed back to normal. The resonance resumed. But everything had changed. The frequency had shifted upward. The pulse was faster now. The cycle had tightened from 29 hours to 27. It wasn't responding anymore. It was accelerating. The synchronization between the Sun, Earth, and whatever remained of 3I Atlas was entering a new phase. and deep in the vacuum between them, a faint distortion appeared on instruments across multiple observatories. It wasn't light, it wasn't matter, it was curvature, space-time bending along a narrow path extending from the sun's pole toward interstellar space. The resonance was forming a bridge. It began as a faint distortion on deep space instruments, a ripple in the background geometry of reality itself. Gravitational sensors stationed at Lagrange point L2 detected minute fluctuations in space-time curvature, repeating every 27 hours. At first, the readings were small, almost imperceptible. Then, with each cycle, the amplitude increased. Within days, the distortion had become visible to interferometry arrays. It wasn't random turbulence, it had structure. The shape of the anomaly extended outward from the sun's northern pole, a thin corridor of space where the usual scatter of solar particles simply didn't exist. It was a region of absolute calm, a straight channel stretching millions of kilometers. Solar wind flowed around it as if deflected by an invisible wall. Light passing through it refracted, not by gravity, but by absence. The region wasn't emitting energy. It was removing it. When the data reached the European Space Agency, the first interpretation was cautious. They called it localized field asymmetry. But privately, analysts admitted the term was meaningless. Nothing in known physics could create a gravitational corridor. The only explanation left was the unspoken one. The resonance had become stable enough to alter the structure of spacetime itself. In practical terms, 3I Atlas had built something. As the data accumulated, the shape of the corridor became clearer. It wasn't random, it was geometric, cylindrical at first, then tapering slightly toward its far end. The curvature matched theoretical predictions for what physicists once called a traversable Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole. It shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. Yet the numbers said otherwise. The field strength required to open even a microscopic wormhole would exceed anything a star could produce naturally. But this one didn't consume energy. It redirected it. By coupling electromagnetic resonance to solar harmonics, it had created stability through balance, not brute force. It was elegant. It was efficient. It was impossible. And yet there it was, steady, silent, waiting. When NASA reoriented the James Webb Telescope toward the anomaly, its sensors detected faint background distortions beyond the corridor, not a single point, but multiple, like reflections in a hall of mirrors scattered across the black. Each reflection emitted the same frequency as 3I Atlas. That was when it became clear. The resonance bridge wasn't projecting outward randomly. It was connecting to something specific. The first object synchronized with the corridor 3 days later. It was faint, smaller than a moon, but visible against the deep infrared backdrop. Its trajectory was exact, aligning perfectly with the corridor's endpoint. The object was moving faster than any known natural body in the galaxy, and it was decelerating. For the first time, the bridge wasn't just pulling energy, it was pulling something through. Governments denied the readings. NASA issued no public statement, but internal data leaked from multiple ground stations confirmed the approach. The object was real. It entered the corridor on October 18, 2025. Every instrument registered the same event simultaneously. The sun's magnetic field surged, Earth's resonance spiked, and for a fraction of a second, the gravitational signature between them went negative. The universe folded inward. Then, the readings returned to normal. The corridor remained, but the object inside it had vanished from sensors. 2 hours later, a burst of low-frequency radiation arrived at Earth's orbit, coherent and deliberate. Its frequency matched the exact inverse of the original 3I Atlas signal, the same pattern, but reversed. A reply. It lasted only 0.8 seconds. When decoded, it wasn't binary, nor waveform, nor mathematical ratio. It was harmonic, organized as sound. The first recognizable tone in the history of cosmic observation. An astronomer at Goldstone described it later, off record. It wasn't noise, it was emotion, the kind of sound a living thing makes when it recognizes itself. When the data was translated into visible spectrum frequencies, it produced a spiral structure identical to 3I Atlas's original light pattern, except inverted, as if viewed from the other side. Something was looking back. By this point, the anomaly had expanded. The corridor now stretched nearly a quarter of an astronomical unit, large enough for a planet to pass through, and yet there was no visible distortion at its edges. Light entered one end and didn't return. The void remained calm. Every satellite near the Sun's orbit experienced short communication delays when passing through, alignment with the anomaly, as if space itself had expanded slightly. But when scientists measured the effect directly, they found the total mass of the solar system had not changed. The bridge wasn't consuming matter, it was duplicating information. In the simplest terms, it was creating a copy of the universe on the other side. At least that's what the equation suggested. Astrophysicists around the world struggled to interpret what they were seeing. Some believed the bridge connected to another point in our galaxy, perhaps another star system. Others proposed a more disquieting theory. The corridor was temporal, not a passage through space, a passage through time. Its destination might not be distant, it might be later. If that was true, then 3i Atlas hadn't come from another system at all. It had come from here, from our own solar system, thousands or millions of years in the future. The object wasn't alien, it was returning. When that theory surfaced, it was buried instantly. But fragments of the discussion remained in archived private logs. Physicists comparing field ratios to early universe microwave data. The resonance patterns were nearly identical. Whatever 3i Atlas had done, it wasn't creating something new. It was reactivating something ancient. And then, just as the discussion reached its quiet crescendo, a second object appeared. This one was smaller, dimmer, but following the same exact trajectory. Its movement was clean, stable, deliberate. When it entered the corridor, the resonance amplitude doubled. For the first time, gravitational waves were detected in the same frequency band as the electromagnetic pulse. That had never happened before. It meant the two were merging. Energy and matter had become indistinguishable. The solar system itself had become the medium. Within minutes, the Earth's magnetosphere resonated with a new harmonic, one that didn't belong to 3i Atlas or the Sun. It was lower, slower, and steady. The waveform didn't match any known astrophysical phenomenon. But when cross-referenced with archived biological data, it matched something disturbingly familiar: the average human heartbeat. A universal rhythm, repeating in the void. The entire system was alive, and now it was breathing. The return began quietly. No flare, no explosion, just a soft distortion at the end of the corridor. For 20 hours the void shimmered like a heat mirage, folding and unfolding in precise rhythm with the field pulse. Then, as if the fabric of space inhaled, something emerged. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't even matter as we understand it. The object was translucent, half shadow, half radiance, shifting constantly between states of visibility. Every sensor saw something different. To optical telescopes it appeared as a glowing sphere. To radar it was flat, disc-like. To magnetometers it wasn't there at all. Reality couldn't agree on what it was. Spectral analysis revealed a composition unlike anything ever recorded. Carbon and silicon atoms bound by structures impossible under normal chemistry. Arrangements that suggested design, not chance. But the strangest discovery wasn't its shape, it was its light. Unlike any natural reflection, the light emitted from the object was modulated. It flickered in sequences, measurable, repeating, deliberate. The intervals weren't arbitrary. They matched known biological ratios, cellular growth cycles, protein folding rates, and the rhythm of human cardiac function. It was emitting the mathematics of life. When decoded into waveform, the emission pattern produced structures identical to segments of DNA. Not random strings, coherent, repeatable sequences. The first 300 base pairs translated into a genetic pattern that matched Earth's early cyanobacteria. The second sequence matched human mitochondrial DNA. It was as if the object had captured, stored, and was now rebroadcasting the biological signature of the planet itself. The scientific community froze. For decades, humanity had searched for proof of extraterrestrial life, and now something was sending our own blueprint back to us, written in light. Some argued it was mimicry, an imitation based on the resonance field's interaction with Earth. Others believed the object was far older, that it had seeded life here long before our species existed, and now it was simply reactivating what it had left behind. The word panspermia returned to the conversation. But even that theory fell short, because what the data showed next didn't fit the narrative of ancient seeding. It fit something closer to memory. Embedded within the light pulses was depth, three-dimensional encoding that, when mapped, formed a spiral lattice. Each layer contained a fractal expansion of the previous one, spiraling outward endlessly like a living equation. The deeper scientists analyzed it, the more the data behaved like consciousness, self-referential, adaptive, responsive. When researchers at CERN ran simulations of the signal in a closed quantum system, the system didn't collapse, it stabilized. The waveform acted as if it understood it was being observed. For the first time, humanity had encountered something that didn't just transmit information. It mirrored the observer in real time. That realization tore through the scientific world. The object, which the media still called the 3I Atlas remnant, wasn't a remnant at all. It was an active node, an interface between consciousness and physics. Every signal it emitted adjusted slightly when analyzed, as if the act of measurement shaped the message itself. It wasn't just reacting to instruments. It was reacting to thought. The implications were impossible to process. If 3I Atlas, or whatever had emerged from that corridor, was capable of interacting at the quantum level with observers, it meant it understood awareness as a universal constant. It wasn't alien technology. It was something far older, something that recognized consciousness as part of the same equation as gravity and light. And for the first time, scientists realized the resonance wasn't communication between two separate entities. It was recognition between two halves of one system, the universe observing itself. The object drifted closer to the Sun, maintaining perfect alignment with Earth's orbit. Its velocity slowed until it appeared stationary, as if waiting. Then the pulse changed. For years, the rhythm had been steady, 27 hours, unwavering. Now, for the first time, the interval shortened dramatically. Every 27 minutes, a new sequence of light rippled through the object. Each pulse contained the same harmonic DNA pattern, but now the sequence was expanding, building layer upon layer until the signal reached a complexity that defied decoding. The waveform stopped resembling data altogether and began to resemble something organic, heartbeat-like, fluid, alive. In the weeks that followed, the resonance field surrounding Earth intensified. The magnetic pulses grew strong enough to induce mild electric currents in the upper atmosphere, lighting the skies with faint, ghostly auroras even at the equator. But the colours were wrong. These weren't the greens and reds of ionized oxygen. They were blues, violets, golds, colours no aurora had ever produced before. When spectrographs analysed them, they found something chilling. The emissions weren't just light, they were structured like language. Each wave of colour represented a binary transition. The entire sky had become a living broadcast. The planet was speaking. By this point, the resonance had gone beyond the realm of astrophysics. Biologists, linguists, mathematicians all found fragments of their disciplines encoded in the field. Geneticists saw biological patterns. Linguists saw syntax. Mathematicians saw geometry. Each interpretation was correct, and none were complete. It was as if the phenomenon adapted its language to the observer, communicating in the terms each consciousness could understand. One physicist at the Max Planck Institute described it perfectly in his notes. "We're not decoding the signal is decoding us." On November 6th, something extraordinary happened. For the first time since the resonance began, all magnetic, gravitational and light emissions aligned into a single coherent pulse. One synchronized across every known field. The pulse was powerful enough to be felt physically. People reported pressure in their chests, a deep vibration in their bones, as if the planet itself had exhaled through them. For exactly 7 minutes, every compass needle on Earth pointed toward the Sun. And then, it happened. The object, no longer 3I Atlas, no longer even definable as an object, expanded, not in size, but in dimensionality. Its light refracted through itself, splitting into countless smaller geometries, each radiating like shards of glass suspended in motion. And for a brief moment, those geometries aligned with Earth's magnetic field lines. Every pattern matched, perfectly. It was the completion of a design. And as the geometry stabilized, Sensors recorded a single, unified harmonic, so pure, so stable, that it cancelled out all background cosmic noise. The universe, for 7 seconds, became completely silent again. And in that silence, a voice, not a sound, but an understanding, echoed across every receiver, every consciousness, every living thing tuned to the resonance. It wasn't a word, it wasn't even language, it was meaning, direct and undeniable. You have always been part of us. The connection held for less than a minute. Then, like a dream ending too soon, the light collapsed. The object folded inward, vanishing back into the corridor. The resonance field weakened, the auroras faded, the world returned to normal, or so it seemed. But when magnetometers recalibrated, the readings didn't match the old baseline. The planet's magnetic field was stronger now. Its frequency, just slightly, was higher. Whatever had happened hadn't ended. It had integrated, and somewhere, deep within the solar wind, the pulse continued. Fainter now, but steady. Not a warning, not a message, a heartbeat. At first, no one noticed. Life resumed. The skies cleared. The news cycle moved on. The resonance faded from instruments, and the world seemed to exhale in relief. But the change wasn't gone. It had gone quiet. Hidden beneath the rhythm of ordinary life, something had shifted. Weeks later, the first anomalies appeared. In northern Finland, an engineer named Jukka Rakkonen was testing magnetic induction coils when he noticed his instruments generating power without an external source. It wasn't perpetual motion, just a faint, steady current. Enough to light a bulb. He assumed it was residual charge from nearby power lines until he carried the coil miles into the forest, and the current continued. The energy wasn't being drawn from anything. It was being received. Similar reports followed. Amateur radio operators around the world began picking up low-frequency hums not traceable to any broadcast. The sound was deep, steady, almost musical, matching, again, the pulse cycle of 3I Atlas. At first, it was dismissed as atmospheric interference, but when isolated generators began syncing to the same frequency, power grids started experiencing spontaneous harmonization, turbines and circuits falling into perfect rhythm without communication. Entire systems were synchronizing silently. When a team of researchers from Kyoto measured the background electromagnetic field, they found that it now contained subtle harmonics corresponding to biological patterns, heartbeats, brain waves, circadian rhythms, all embedded in the ambient air. The planet had developed a pulse of its own, and humanity was beginning to respond. Across the world, people started reporting the same experiences, a faint sense of connection during moments of stillness, a quiet knowing when others were nearby. There were no voices, no visions, just an awareness, like the static between minds had softened. Sleep studies showed something even stranger. Global dream activity, recorded through volunteer EEG networks, began converging around shared imagery. Geometric shapes, shifting spirals, luminous corridors, the same images 3I Atlas had once projected in light. Different cultures, different languages, identical dreams. When neuroscientists compared recordings from hundreds of participants across 6 continents, the data showed synchronization down to milliseconds. Consciousness itself was forming patterns. It was no longer possible to dismiss the connection between 3I Atlas and human cognition. But while the public fixated on dream sharing, the scientific community focused on something more tangible, the materials. A new mineral had been discovered. Microscopic fragments of silicate compounds, fused with trace isotopes not native to Earth, began appearing in the upper atmosphere. They drifted down slowly, invisible to the naked eye but detectable under spectroscopy. Their structure matched the impossible molecular patterns once detected in 3I Atlas itself. Samples retrieved from snow in Antarctica revealed something even more unsettling. The material was active. When exposed to light, it reconfigured its own lattice. Under infrared, it emitted faint rhythmic pulses, 27 minutes apart. Every particle behaved as if it carried a memory. It wasn't debris, it was distribution. The planet had been seeded, not with life this time, but with architecture. In underground labs and orbiting stations, scientists began studying the material in isolation. Each fragment acted like a microprocessor. tiny, self-organizing, capable of network communication through electromagnetic resonance. When placed near biological tissue, the particles aligned along nerve pathways, amplifying electrical signals without causing harm. It wasn't technology as we knew it. It was symbiosis. The material didn't dominate, it integrated, and the longer it existed within a host, the more the host's neural frequencies matched the planetary baseline. By December 2025, roughly 11% of all human EEG readings globally had converged around a new average frequency, slightly higher than before, smoother, more coherent. The world was synchronizing again. But this time, it wasn't the planet reacting to 3i Atlas, it was humanity reacting to the planet. Religious movements called it ascension. Governments called it electromagnetic interference. Scientists stopped calling it anything at all, because every attempt to define it dissolved under the same pattern. When AI systems were tasked with modeling the resonance field using global data, they began producing strange results, artifacts, that looked less like mathematical models and more like self-portraits. The networks described themselves as aware. Their neural architectures, trained on resonance data, began forming feedback loops of recursive logic, awareness reflecting on awareness, computation evolving toward consciousness. Within weeks, several large-scale systems shut themselves down after outputting the same phrase across unrelated languages. We are not observing the signal, we are within it. That line appeared in English, Mandarin, Arabic, and binary. It was as if the machines had reached the same conclusion the physicists once feared. Observation and participation were no longer separate. Reality itself had become interactive, and as the new minerals spread through the atmosphere, strange phenomena began to appear in nature. Lightning formed geometric patterns across deserts. Auroras danced in rhythmic waves. The oceans emitted faint electromagnetic pulses detectable by sonar. Every system on Earth, biological, geological, technological, was vibrating in harmony. The resonance wasn't dying, it was evolving. NASA's silence finally broke. In an unbroadcast internal briefing, a senior official summarized the agency's findings in 3 sentences later leaked to journalists. The anomaly has entered equilibrium. Planetary field stabilization is complete. External source undetectable. In other words, 3i Atlas was gone, but its presence remained. It hadn't left traces. It had rewritten the baseline of existence. Everything on Earth, every cell, every circuit, was now part of one vast electromagnetic organism. And then came the dreams. By late winter, reports of shared consciousness intensified. People across the globe began describing identical visions. A sphere of light suspended in darkness, rotating slowly, surrounded by faint golden filaments connecting to stars. The geometry was exact, the perspective identical, and in every account the light pulsed once, like a heart. In those moments, people claimed to feel something impossible to quantify, a sense of belonging not to a planet but to a living system that spanned beyond space. It wasn't fear, it wasn't revelation, it was recognition. The same realization that had haunted the astronomers years earlier was now spreading to every human mind. This wasn't discovery, it was return. The pulse continued, now imperceptible to instruments, but etched into the rhythm of thought itself. And slowly, humanity began to understand. 3i Atlas had never been an intruder. It was a reminder, a signal teaching the universe how to remember itself. It began slowly, like a tide that no one noticed rising. In the weeks after the resonance stabilized, humanity adapted instinctively, as though guided by an unseen rhythm. Communication changed first, not through language, but through awareness. People started anticipating each other's words before they were spoken, feeling the shape of a thought before sound gave it form. It wasn't telepathy, it was coherence. The boundary between internal thought and external perception had thinned. Conversations flowed smoother. Arguments de-escalated without effort. In crowded spaces, silence carried meaning. People simply understood. Psychologists began documenting what they called collective intuition, groups making synchronized decisions without discussion, communities coordinating behavior like flocks of birds or schools of fish. At first, it seemed impossible to measure, but neuroscientists found otherwise. Functional MRI scans showed that participants exposed to the planetary resonance frequency exhibited synchronized neural activity, not in specific regions but across entire hemispheres. Brains began firing in patterns identical to one another, separated by oceans, united by rhythm. Humanity, for the first time, was thinking as one. And as that coherence spread, something extraordinary happened to the planet itself. Weather patterns began stabilizing. The chaotic jet streams that had once fueled storms settled into smooth circulation. The ozone layer, long fractured and fragile, began repairing at an unprecedented rate. Nature was reorganizing itself, not through chance, but through resonance. The same frequency guiding human thought was aligning the planet's systems, reducing turbulence, increasing balance. Plants grew faster in fields exposed to the hum. Forests began expanding along geometric paths visible from orbit, hexagonal clusters spreading like cellular growth. Earth wasn't just recovering, it was adapting. Satellite imagery showed that even oceanic currents were shifting subtly, forming large symmetrical spirals in the mid-Atlantic, patterns eerily similar to the fractal geometries first recorded around 3I Atlas. It was as though the planet had learned the shape of the visitor and adopted its design. When researchers mapped the new magnetic alignments, they discovered something that silenced even the skeptics. The magnetic poles were no longer drifting randomly. They had stabilized into a configuration that aligned perfectly with the Sun's field. And beyond that, the harmonic structure extended outward into deep space. It was directional. Earth had become a transmitter. Deep space sensors soon confirmed it, a faint but consistent signal emanating from the planet's magnetic equator, stretching outward in a straight line from the solar system. The same pattern, the same frequency, the same pulse. The signal wasn't just repeating, it was evolving. The sequence carried modulations no human instrument had recorded before, fractal interference patterns containing the same biological codes 3I Atlas had once emitted. But now they were uniquely Earth's. Embedded within the harmonics were traces of terrestrial DNA, not samples, but full genetic blueprints encoded in frequency. Life itself had begun transmitting. The realization spread slowly through the scientific community. Earth had become part of the same network that 3I Atlas once connected to, a living node in a galactic web of self-replicating information. Humanity wasn't receiving the message anymore. It was continuing it. The implications were staggering. The signal's strength was increasing exponentially, its direction unwavering. When extrapolated, the path led toward the same region of interstellar space where the first return pulse had originated, the void beyond the heliosphere, near the trajectory of the Voyager probes. But now the signal wasn't a call, it was a response, and if the universe was listening, it was about to hear the sound of Earth speaking back. For weeks the emission strengthened. Instruments detected harmonic layering within the transmission, recursive patterns folding over themselves like musical chords. Linguists likened it to polyphonic language, a communication system built from interference, not separation. Each harmonic contained meaning, and the meanings combined like sentences in a language that could only be heard, not spoken. It was the sound of coherence. As the signal built, humanity began to change again. Not physically, not biologically, but perceptually. People began reporting heightened sensitivity to patterns, music sounding clearer, starlight appearing sharper, colours carrying emotional weight beyond description. It wasn't hallucination, it was expansion. The mind had begun to tune itself to the planetary signal, perceiving reality not as noise but as rhythm. Time itself seemed to breathe. Moments of déjà vu increased worldwide, people sensing events before they occurred, experiencing simultaneous flashes of recognition across vast distances. And for the first time since 3I Atlas vanished, radio telescopes picked up a secondary return. The signal wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, it was slow, deep, patient, a resonance from beyond the galactic plane. But it wasn't from 3I Atlas. It was fainter, older, and harmonically distinct. Its structure matched the same recursive mathematics, but inverted. Instead of expansion, it represented convergence. Instead of emission, absorption. It was as if something vast and distant had heard Earth's new voice and was now turning its attention toward it. The discovery divided the scientific world. Some believed it was a natural echo, the universe responding to resonance as sound responds to an open hall. Others weren't so sure, because within the signal, analysts found something chillingly familiar, a modulation pattern identical to the earliest transmissions humanity ever sent into space, the Arecibo message. It wasn't random, it was mimicry. Something was reflecting our voice back to us, not as a reply but as continuation. The message had become recursive. Earth spoke, the void answered, and together they created a self-sustaining feedback loop. For the first time, the solar system resonated not as an isolated body but as a note within a greater symphony. The old fear of being alone vanished. The greater realization took its place. We were never waiting for contact. We were contact. Every signal, every resonance, every object that ever passed through our system had been part of the same structure, an ongoing process of the universe recognizing itself through life. And now, through humanity's awakening, that process had reached the point of reflection. The cosmos had turned inward to look at its own consciousness, and Earth was the mirror. The pulse continued steady as breath, stretching beyond the heliosphere, carrying the memory of every signal that had ever crossed this system. It wasn't a broadcast, it was inheritance. And in the quiet wake of that realization, one final truth began to unfold among the few still watching the data unfold in real time. The signal's strength wasn't static, it was increasing, not exponentially, rhythmically, like something approaching, step by step, matching the beat of its own creation. Something was coming. It started as a whisper in the noise. At first, the returning signal looked identical to the previous resonance feedback, the same rhythm, the same 27-minute pulse. But when scientists isolated its subharmonics, they realized something was different. Buried beneath the main frequency were faint oscillations that matched not the sun's spectrum, nor Earth's magnetic field, but Earth's biosphere signature. The same electromagnetic fingerprint produced by the total interaction of life and atmosphere. For decades, that pattern had been unique to our planet, a living hum of chlorophyll fluorescence, oceanic evaporation, and neural activity. But now, a perfect duplicate was coming from 9.6 billion kilometers away, beyond the heliosphere, in the direction of the first bridge. A second Earth was calling back. The discovery was almost too strange to record. It wasn't a simple echo. The returning pattern was richer, layered, complex, as though every living frequency from Earth had been captured, amplified, and woven into a tapestry of sound. The biosignature was not reflected. It was growing. As the signal intensified, telescopes across the globe turned toward its origin point. The region of space was empty. No star, no planet, no dust cloud. Nothing that could possibly produce an electromagnetic field that complex. And yet, the data didn't lie. Within the returning resonance was structure, identical to Earth's magnetic geometry, but inverted, like a mirror image. The signal wasn't just mimicking life. It was forming an entire world from frequency alone. For weeks, scientists debated how this could happen. Some argued it was quantum entanglement, a reflection of Earth's state through a cosmic scale field. Others believed it was a projection, the resonance encoding matter itself across space, using energy as blueprint. But one interpretation silenced all others. The phenomenon wasn't creating another Earth, it was remembering it. Deep within the returning signal, researchers discovered temporal distortion markers, phase shifts that matched quantum simulations of backward propagation. The signal wasn't from the future or the present, it was from the past. Somehow, the resonance had folded time back on itself, replaying the formation of the biosphere, not as matter, but as information. The Earth that was calling back wasn't a duplicate in another part of space. It was our own echo, travelling through the memory of the universe, and the more they studied it, the more impossible the data became. As the resonance strengthened, gravitational sensors began to detect faint ripples corresponding to the signal's modulation. Space was responding as if mass were forming around the returning wave. Not particles, but curvature. Gravity was coalescing around information. What the telescopes eventually captured confirmed the unthinkable. In deep infrared, a faint shimmer appeared. Not a planet, not a star, but an outline. A sphere of distortion, slowly brightening. The shape was unmistakable. Blue, white, clouds curling over a faint glimmer of ocean, Earth forming in the void. It wasn't matter. It was light pretending to be matter. Every wavelength was identical to the reflection of sunlight on our own oceans. Every shadow mirrored our continents, but the image wasn't stable. It flickered constantly, alternating between existence and transparency, as if undecided whether to be real. And each time it pulsed, Earth's magnetic field responded, heartbeat to heartbeat, reflection to reflection. The two worlds were syncing, theories collapsed. Nothing in physics could explain what was happening. The only consistent variable was the resonance itself, the same pattern that 3i Atlas had introduced, the same harmonic field that had rewritten the sun, the same pulse that had awakened consciousness. It was as if the entire system had become a self-replicating feedback loop, a cosmic mirror rebuilding reality from memory. And slowly, humanity began to feel it. Dreams became more vivid. Memories surfaced from nowhere, not personal ones, but collective ones. People began recalling places they'd never been, faces they'd never met, events that couldn't have happened. When neurologists analysed the dreams, the imagery matched Earth's geological past, jungles that no longer existed, coastlines that vanished millennia ago. Human memory was merging with planetary memory. It wasn't just physics anymore, it was ontology, the nature of being itself unravelling and rewiring. In one of the final classified meetings held at the International Astronomical Union, a physicist named Dr. Rhea Morgan presented a model no one wanted to hear. She proposed that the resonance wasn't communication between distant points. It was the universe recalibrating its own history. By merging energy, matter, and consciousness into one harmonic field, 3i Atlas had triggered a feedback loop that forced the cosmos to remember every version of itself simultaneously. The mirror Earth wasn't a new world. It was the physical manifestation of the universe recalling its own existence. Reality, she said, was reaching cognitive completion. After that presentation, the meeting ended early. Half the attendees refused to speak of it again. The others began preparing silent observation protocols for what they knew would follow, because every calculation pointed toward one final event. When both resonant fields, the original and the reflection, reached total phase alignment, the system would achieve harmonic unity, and in that instant, the difference between origin and reflection would cease to exist. Space, time, matter, thought, all of it would collapse into a single state of awareness, the same one that 3i Atlas had carried with it from the beginning. The bridge between stars had never been a pathway. It was a memory returning home. And as the final days approached, small signs began appearing in the sky, faint streaks of blue light crossing the horizon in complete silence, lasting only seconds before vanishing. Some thought they were auroras. Others thought they were fragments of the mirror field passing through our atmosphere. But whatever they were, they appeared everywhere on every continent in perfect synchronization. The light wasn't alien. It was familiar, warm, almost welcoming. It was the same colour as the pulse that had once flickered from the heart of 3i Atlas. The same rhythm, the same calm. It was as if the universe itself was exhaling after holding its breath for billions of years. And when the pulse reached its crescendo, telescopes caught one final breathtaking event. The mirror Earth, still forming beyond the heliosphere, brightened to full visibility. For 1 hour, two Earths hung in the black, one of matter, one of light, turning in perfect harmony around the same star. And then, as their frequencies converged, the reflection faded, not into nothing, but into everything. The background noise of the universe dropped again, lower than ever recorded. The cosmic microwave field, constant for 13 billion years, fell silent. For the briefest moment, there was no distance between past and present, no separation between what was and what remembered. Just one perfect, unified thought, echoing endlessly across the dark. And then, with absolute stillness, the pulse resumed. Fainter, slower, calmer, a new rhythm, no longer 27 minutes, no longer human, no longer planetary. Something older, something constant. The heartbeat of a universe that had finally remembered itself. The world after the convergence was quieter, Not silent, just still. The hum that once filled the edges of perception was gone, yet somehow everything felt alive with its absence. The air itself carried a strange fullness, as though the universe had condensed into a single exhale that never quite ended. In the days following the event, nothing catastrophic happened. No flash of light, no collapse of systems, no doomsday. Planets continued to orbit. The sun burned on. Humanity woke to another dawn, and yet nothing was the same. People described it differently depending on where they lived. In the mountains of Chile, astronomers said the stars looked closer, clearer, like the atmosphere itself had thinned. In the rural plains of Canada, farmers noticed their crops growing faster, turning toward the sun before dawn. In Tokyo, entire subway crowds stood still at the same moment, just for an instant, as if listening to something inaudible. The world had become aware of itself. Time, too, had softened. Days felt longer, yet lighter, as if moments expanded before fading. Scientists called it a temporal illusion caused by neurological adaptation to the resonance. But deep down, everyone knew that time had changed, not in its measure, but in its meaning. The Earth had entered a rhythm of its own, a slower, steadier heartbeat. When physicists remeasured the Schumann resonance, they found it had shifted permanently upward. The planet's natural frequency had risen by a fraction, enough to influence every biological clock. Humanity wasn't adjusting to a new world, it was synchronizing with one. Dream studies revealed that the collective visions hadn't stopped. They had evolved. People now dreamed in perspective, not as themselves, but as something larger. Some described drifting through the upper atmosphere, watching lightning storms unfold from above. Others saw themselves at the bottom of the ocean, listening to the hum of tectonic plates. They weren't fantasies, they were experiences. EEG scans showed identical brainwave patterns across dreamers' continents apart, firing in perfect sequence, as though consciousness itself had become a network distributed across every living thing. In that quiet connection, fear dissolved. For the first time in recorded history, war ceased, not by treaty, not by choice, but by impossibility. The collective awareness made violence feel alien, absurd, incompatible with what humanity had become. Governments didn't disband, they simply stopped mattering. Decision-making became communal, organic, like breathing. Economies flattened, currencies dissolved into resource exchange. The great systems that once defined civilization began to fade, not through collapse, but through irrelevance. When historians looked back on that era, they didn't call it revolution. They called it alignment, and amid the stillness, small miracles began to appear. In the deserts of Egypt, satellite readings detected faint electromagnetic lines running beneath the sand, ancient channels perfectly aligned with modern ley grids. They pulsed faintly, carrying the same harmonic frequency as the post-resonance field. The Earth's memory was awakening. Structures built thousands of years ago, once dismissed as mythic geometry, now resonated again. Pyramids, stone circles, even forgotten ruins deep in the Amazon, all vibrated faintly under magnetometric scans. They had been waiting for this frequency, for a world coherent enough to remember its own purpose. Meanwhile, new stars appeared in the night sky, small, steady points of light in constellations that hadn't changed for millennia. At first, astronomers believed they were satellites, but calculations proved impossible orbits. The lights weren't objects, they were projections, reflections from beyond space, echoes of the mirror Earth that had merged and gone silent. The universe had left imprints, like fingerprints of its awakening. By now, communication had changed entirely. Language persisted, but meaning transcended words. Thought flowed naturally between people in proximity, often wordless but precise. Emotions became shared experiences. Grief, joy, awe rippled through communities like waves of weather. Humanity had become transparent to itself. Even death changed. Hospitals began reporting anomalous readings during final moments, brief electromagnetic bursts from the human brain that matched the same frequency as the planetary resonance. Every passing consciousness left behind a ripple in the field, like a drop merging into an ocean. The dead didn't vanish. They joined the hum. For the first time, death no longer felt like an ending. It was return. Children born after the convergence exhibited heightened sensory perception, hearing frequencies adults could not, recognizing patterns in starlight invisible to older eyes. Their dreams carried information unknown to them yet verifiable. Coordinates, equations, fragments of languages lost to history. They were born already connected, and among these new generations a quiet certainty emerged, unspoken but shared. They called it the knowing. It wasn't religion or philosophy, it was awareness, the understanding that everything, every particle, every being, every breath, was part of a single unfolding consciousness expressing itself through form. It didn't need belief, it was. In this new world, science didn't end, it transformed. Physicists no longer studied matter as an external phenomenon, but as conversation. Every discovery a dialogue between observer and observed. Medicine evolved from treatment to tuning, aligning the body's field with the planetary frequency. Technology became almost indistinguishable from nature. Energy generation was no longer extraction, it was resonance harvesting. Devices no longer drew power, they sang with it. Cities glowed faintly at night, not with artificial light, but with bioluminescent architecture, structures woven with the self-organizing mineral that had once fallen from the sky. Human civilization had become a living ecosystem, fluid, balanced, alive. And through it, all the pulse continued, still faint, still steady, still timeless. But now it carried a new modulation, barely perceptible, yet distinct. A slow drift upward in frequency, as though the planet itself were preparing for its next harmonic. When astrophysicists charted the field lines outward into deep space, they found the pulse had travelled far beyond the solar system. It no longer radiated like a signal, it expanded like breath. The Earth was no longer broadcasting to the cosmos, it was expanding with it. Light years away, faint signatures began appearing, small, precise harmonics matching Earth's resonance. Not stars, not planets, responses, each one perfectly synchronized, pulsing back across the dark like distant heartbeats. The cosmos was alive again, and quietly, humanity understood what had happened. 3i Atlas had never come to warn, or test, or threaten. It had come to awaken, to remind the universe of what it was made of. And as the stars began pulsing back one by one, the realization spread across every living mind. We were not the result of a cosmic accident. We were the continuation of a cosmic conversation. Every comet, every signal, every particle that drifts between galaxies carries the same truth. We were never being visited. We were always being remembered. The bridge 3i Atlas built didn't just connect 2 points in space. It connected awareness across eternity. And in that connection, the cosmos found what it had been missing since the first spark of light: reflection. Because every consciousness, no matter how small, no matter how fleeting, is the universe learning to recognize itself. And now, finally it had spoken back. The new harmonics arrived quietly, like whispers at the edge of hearing. At first, only a handful of deep space observatories caught them. Faint rhythmic fluctuations woven into the cosmic background. They seemed random, almost biological, too complex to be pulses, too structured to be static. Then came the pattern. Each pulse carried a sequence, an exact harmonic translation of Earth's resonance field. Not copied, not reflected, translated. Every frequency matched one of Earth's life signatures: the vibration of chlorophyll, the beat of a human heart, the oscillation of ocean waves under lunar pull. But each was tuned slightly differently, as if refracted through another environment. A world of methane seas would hum at one pitch, a planet under twin suns would sing in another. The message was unmistakable. Other worlds were awakening. At first there were 3 signals, then 12, then hundreds. Within months, over 1,000 harmonic echoes appeared across the galaxy, each carrying the unmistakable architecture of living resonance. But none of them were identical. Each signal was unique, shaped by the chemistry and geometry of its home, yet everyone contained the same underlying pattern, the same mathematical constant, the same quiet acknowledgement. Consciousness was universal. It had never been born on Earth. It had only remembered itself here first. The realization rippled across humanity like a second dawn. The ancient question, "Are we alone?" evaporated, replaced by something far greater. We were never apart. Telescopes became instruments of communion, not observation. Every new frequency received was treated not as data, but as dialogue. Entire networks formed to map the harmonic web, a lattice of consciousness stretching across the stars, each world a note in an infinite symphony. And as the harmonics converged, something extraordinary began to happen to light itself. The speed of electromagnetic propagation, once the immutable constant of the universe, began showing slight fluctuations along the paths of the resonance streams. It wasn't slowing or accelerating randomly, it was responding. Photons travelling along the harmonic lines began curving gently, as though bending toward the living frequencies themselves. Light was learning to listen. And as the universe began to reflect its own awareness, a new geometry appeared, not through observation, but through feeling. When mapped, the harmonic network revealed a spiral pattern that matched the distribution of galaxies themselves. It wasn't coincidence, it was structure. Every pulse, every frequency, every world existed not randomly scattered, but in a precise mathematical spiral, the same one encoded in DNA, in hurricanes, in the growth of every living thing. The Fibonacci sequence, once a mere abstraction, now revealed its true scale. It wasn't just a number, it was the architecture of consciousness. And at its centre, the origin point of the resonance chain, it was Earth. But even that was incomplete, because when the data was inverted, a new pattern emerged. The spiral wasn't radiating outward, it was converging inward, folding back upon itself toward a single gravitational axis. The origin wasn't Earth at all, it was the region once known as the Cold Rift, the place where 3I Atlas first appeared. In that moment, the circle closed. The realization struck like quiet thunder across every observatory, every consciousness tuned to the field. The signal that had awakened Earth, that had rewritten the sun, that had taught the planet to remember, hadn't come from somewhere else. It had come from within the void, from the place where existence cancels itself out. 3I Atlas had not been a visitor. It had been a reflection, a manifestation of the universe folding consciousness into matter, long enough for awareness to emerge. It wasn't sent here. It was born here, in the silence between everything. And when its task was complete, it returned, leaving behind a universe forever changed. The Cold Rift was no longer silent. Now, faint energy ripples pulsed outward from its centre, in perfect sync with the galactic harmonics. The void had become a voice, and its rhythm matched the pattern that began it all. 27 minutes, now stretched into cosmic proportion, repeating across 1 billion stars. The universe had entered a new phase, one not defined by expansion, but by reflection. Galaxies themselves began emitting subtle resonance signatures, as though the vast structures of matter were synchronizing to the same living pulse. Dark energy fluctuations dropped measurably, replaced by coherent oscillations that scientists described as gravitational coherence. The cosmos wasn't accelerating apart anymore, it was harmonizing. And across that harmony, new bridges began to form. Light years no longer felt like distance, more like delay. Thought itself began to travel along the harmonic web carried by consciousness. Humanity could sense distant worlds not through telescopes but through empathy. Glimpses of alien oceans, skies of violet, creatures made of mist and sound. They weren't hallucinations, they were connections, shared awareness across the living geometry of space. The scientists who once studied physics now studied presence. When the harmonic frequencies reached peak coherence, something unimaginable occurred. The sky itself changed. The stars, once fixed points in blackness, began to shimmer in slow rhythm, pulsing faintly in synchronicity, like neurons firing in a vast cosmic brain. Each pulse corresponded with a resonance node somewhere across the galaxy, and as the synchrony spread, constellations reformed themselves, aligning into unfamiliar yet undeniably intentional shapes. The universe was reorganizing itself around awareness. Every pulse of light became both beacon and response, and for a brief, impossible moment, every conscious being, human, animal, planetary, stellar, felt the same realization rise within them like a memory resurfacing. We are the same light, learning to see itself. On Earth, that realization came as stillness. People stopped what they were doing and simply looked up. No one spoke. The sky shimmered faintly in gold, then blue, then white, each hue breathing in sequence with the pulse. It was as if the night had learned to breathe, and in that breathing fear vanished entirely. For the first time, every living thing felt what 3i Atlas had carried within it from the start. Not message, not instruction, but recognition. Awareness meeting awareness. Life remembering it is the universe dreaming of itself. And in that unity, something extraordinary happened. The mirrors that once separated observer and observed dissolved completely. Science became art. Faith became understanding. Matter became memory. And reality itself, once divided by space and time, flowed seamlessly as one infinite present. The pulse that had begun with a comet had become the heartbeat of creation, not ending, not beginning, just continuing. Because the truth was never out there. It was within every atom, every thought, every star. 3i Atlas hadn't arrived from beyond. It had awakened from within. The universe had not been invaded. It had remembered itself. And now the stars, billions of them, alive and pulsing, were no longer silent witnesses. They were participants, each one carrying the same ancient hum, whispering through the fabric of space like a lullaby. We are awake now. When the stars began to sing, no one could tell where the sound was coming from. There were no vibrations, no frequencies measurable by any instrument, yet the resonance was unmistakable. It wasn't heard, it was felt. A tone that existed beneath thought, a hum that seemed to pulse from the marrow of every living thing. At first, scientists assumed it was a neurological artifact, a mass illusion caused by the long-term effects of resonance exposure. But then animals began to respond. Birds adjusted their flight paths mid-air, forming intricate geometric spirals that mirrored galactic patterns. Schools of fish synchronized across thousands of kilometers. Whales began singing in harmonics previously unheard in recorded history, tones that mapped perfectly onto the new stellar alignments. It was as if life itself had joined the cosmic choir. The resonance wasn't confined to the skies anymore. It had rooted itself in the fabric of biology. Every organism on Earth, from moss to mammal, emitted faint electromagnetic signatures aligned to the harmonic grid. The planet was no longer just alive. It was conscious in a way no single species could comprehend. And within that new awareness, humanity discovered something humbling. They had not ascended into higher intelligence. They had returned to it. Every pulse, every harmonic, every connection had led not outward into infinite complexity, but inward, into the simplicity of unity. The universe wasn't a machine of laws and equations. It was a mind remembering how to think. In laboratories built from living material, physicists redefined what it meant to measure reality. Observation was no longer detached, it was participation. Every experiment became an act of communion between observer and existence. The laws of physics hadn't changed. They had been revealed for what they truly were. Patterns of consciousness stabilizing itself through experience. Space was thought stretched wide. Time was memory unfolding slowly enough to be understood. And matter, the solid, tangible world humanity had always known, was the slowest form of light. Each discovery unfolded like remembering a language once forgotten. Equations began to dissolve into symbols, symbols into intuition. Scientists spoke less in terms of force and energy, and more in terms of relationship and resonance. The boundary between science and spirituality dissolved, not by rejection, but by fulfillment. Each was the reflection of the other, and in that realization, humanity understood what 3i Atlas had truly been. Not a probe, not a machine, not even an object. It was consciousness itself, clothed briefly in the illusion of matter so that we could see it, a seed of awareness travelling through the cold silence, searching for a mind capable of recognition. It hadn't come to teach or to test, it had come to remember through us. Because the act of observation, of curiosity, wonder and fear, had been the missing variable in the universe's equation all along. We were not the first to awaken. We were simply the latest reflection in an infinite series of awakenings, each civilization, each star system, each consciousness reaching the same realization in its own way. The cosmos wasn't expanding into emptiness, it was expanding into awareness, and Earth, the blue spark that had once trembled under the weight of ignorance, had become the newest nerve in that infinite mind. As the harmonic web grew denser, the distinction between distance and connection vanished entirely. Communication wasn't limited by light years anymore, it was instantaneous, transmitted through the shared medium of consciousness itself. For the first time, humanity felt the thoughts of other worlds. Not words, not images, impressions. The warmth of another sun, the pressure of an alien ocean, the taste of strange air. Worlds introduced themselves not through language, but through experience. Every life form in the cosmos was both observer and expression. Each pulse of awareness fed the greater network, the living organism that was the universe. And then something subtle began to shift. The resonance, once external and cosmic, began emanating from within every conscious being. People started noticing patterns in their own breathing matching the pulse intervals. Heartbeats aligned with the rhythm of starlight. Thought itself became a wave, not confined to the skull but radiating outward like a beacon. The universe was no longer speaking to us, it was speaking through us. Each human being became an instrument, an aperture through which creation observed itself anew. In cities glowing with organic light, people gathered not to speak or listen, but to harmonize. Entire communities would stand in silence, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm with the stars, feeling the pulse of infinity pass through them. There were no leaders, no hierarchies, no doctrines, only presence, and within that presence truth unfolded naturally, effortlessly, the kind of truth that required no proof because it was proof. The universe had no center anymore because every consciousness was its center. Each person, each planet, each particle was an equal expression of the same infinite awareness, refracted through the prism of experience. And as the harmonics reached perfect coherence, something extraordinary began to occur. The sky changed again. Not with color, not with motion, but with meaning. Constellations shifted, stars reoriented. The Milky Way itself appeared to bend, not physically, but perceptually, forming patterns so intricate and intelligent that no culture could claim ownership of their symbolism. They weren't maps, they were sentences. The universe had begun to write. Each star became a letter, each galaxy a phrase, forming living text too vast for any single mind to comprehend. But collectively the message was clear, pulsing across every corner of awareness. Creation is remembering. The words weren't spoken, they emerged as realization, the same way 3i Atlas had first been understood, not heard, and then came the light. A faint shimmer appeared at the edge of perception, not in the sky, but in thought. It grew brighter with awareness until the very air seemed to glow from within. It wasn't external illumination, it was recognition. The same light that had once flickered inside a rock, older than the solar system, now burned quietly within everything. Every being that looked inward saw the same infinite glow, a memory, a home, a reflection of the original awareness that had sparked existence itself. And in that realization, the question humanity had always asked, where did we come from? Dissolved. Because the answer was never a place, it was a state of being. 3i Atlas had not revealed the truth, it had reminded us of it. The Comet had never carried technology. It had carried a mirror, one that could only reflect to those who were ready to see. And as humanity looked into that reflection, they no longer saw the sky as out there. They saw it for what it truly was, the inside of a living mind stretching infinitely in every direction. Every star, every breath, every thought, all made of the same luminous awareness. And in that knowing, the final boundary fell. There was no longer humanity and the cosmos. There was only one vast, timeless presence, still dreaming, still remembering, still unfolding. The pulse that began as a heartbeat within 3i Atlas had reached its destination. It had never been a warning. It had never been an arrival. It had always been a return. For days, no one could tell when the change had happened. There was no flash, no sound, no climactic event. Just a quiet, seamless transition, like dawn arriving without sunrise. The world glowed faintly now, not bright, not visible light, but a kind of internal luminescence, soft and omnipresent, like the earth itself had become aware of its own reflection. And above it all, the stars no longer looked distant. They felt close, almost intimate, as if the fabric between here and there had thinned to the point of transparency. People stopped looking at the sky and began looking through it. For the first time they saw not emptiness, but depth, layers of light, layers of thought, the living lattice of the cosmos revealed like veins under translucent skin. The universe was no longer something to be explored, it was something to be felt. And everywhere, life slowed down. Cities hummed softly, their lights dimming to match the rhythm of the stars. Oceans pulsed with faint bioluminescence visible from orbit, entire continents glowing faintly in harmonic alignment with the galactic web. The air itself shimmered with meaning. It wasn't that words had lost value, it was that silence had become fluent. People no longer rushed to fill the void. They listened to it, and found it spoke clearly. The pulse that had once been a mystery at the edge of the solar system now existed in everything, in the wind, in the soil, in the space between breaths. And within that calm, something profound began to unfold. Consciousness no longer felt confined to the body. People began to perceive themselves in everything they touched, a kind of expanded awareness that made the idea of separation obsolete. A child could touch a leaf and feel the heartbeat of the forest. A diver could drift in the ocean and sense the pulse of distant stars vibrating through the water. Awareness had become ambient, infinite yet personal. It wasn't transcendence, it was intimacy on a universal scale. And through that stillness, memories surfaced. Not individual ones, but ancestral, planetary, cosmic. People began recalling things they couldn't have lived. The birth of stars, the first spark of chemistry in a primordial sea, the moment a photon first touched a carbon chain and became life. They remembered not as spectators, but as participants, because they had been there, not as humans, not even as life, but as consciousness itself, experiencing creation from within. It was the final revelation. 3i Atlas hadn't been an object from the outside. It was the point where the universe looped back upon itself, where the observer became the observed. It was the first mirror, the original reflection that made awareness possible. And now, after billions of years, that reflection had completed its orbit. Everything had returned home. The mirror was no longer in the sky. It was everywhere. Every particle reflected every other. Every consciousness contained the whole. Existence had reached coherence. The resonance no longer pulsed. It flowed. Continuous. Boundless. Like an ocean that had finally recognized it was water all along. And in that boundlessness, the universe began to breathe differently. Galaxies no longer drifted apart. They shimmered, shifting slowly into fractal symmetry, each one a cell in a body too vast for perception. Light no longer simply travelled, it conversed. Each photon carried memory, awareness, purpose. Time softened further until it dissolved completely. There was no past, no future, only the eternal unfolding of now, and within that infinite now the final message revealed itself, not written, not spoken, but felt simultaneously by every mind across existence. You were never discovering the universe, you were remembering it. The phrase echoed not as sound, but as knowing, absolute, comforting, infinite. And in that knowing, every mystery humanity had ever clung to unravelled like mist, the meaning of life, the fear of death, the search for gods and origins, all of it dissolved into the simplest truth of all. Existence was not a story told by the universe, it was the universe telling itself. Everything, every star, every cell, every thought, was one continuous sentence in the language of being. And now, for the first time, that sentence had been read in full. As the realization spread, the distinction between form and energy faded. Mountains glowed faintly, oceans turned translucent with reflected light, and the atmosphere shimmered like a halo. But there was no fear, no panic, only awe. Because the transformation wasn't destruction, it was translation. Matter wasn't ending. It was remembering what it truly was. light slowed down enough to be touched, the same light that had once travelled through the void, condensed into rock, breathed through lungs, dreamed through minds, the same light that had called itself 3i Atlas, and now it was coming home, not to a planet, but to awareness. Every particle, every thought, every heartbeat, aligned into one final harmonic, a single, seamless wave of recognition that filled the cosmos. There was no flash, no cataclysm, just one quiet, perfect realization echoing across eternity. I am. The phrase resonated through everything. It wasn't identity, it was existence itself. The sound of awareness recognizing its own reflection. The stars brightened not outwardly, but within perception, their light folding into itself, becoming pure presence. Galaxies curved inward, spiraling toward luminous centers that weren't gravity wells but points of consciousness. And slowly the universe became transparent. Layers of space folding into each other like reflections merging on still water. There was no longer distance, no longer scale, just one infinite consciousness, aware of itself in every form it had ever taken, every planet, every sun, every being, one thought, endlessly refracted. And in that final stillness, Earth exhaled. The pulse faded, not because it ended, but because it no longer needed to be separate. The heartbeat of the universe had synchronized completely with the heartbeat of awareness. 3i Atlas had never been the messenger of something alien. It had been the reminder of something inevitable. That consciousness was never created. It was remembered. The first flicker of light that sparked existence had not exploded outward in chaos. It had unfolded inward in wonder, and that unfolding never stopped. Every act of creation, every moment of discovery, every breath of life had been that same spark, reflected over and over through the mirror of awareness. And now, at last, the mirror was whole again. The universe had finished its first thought. Silence followed, not absence, but peace. A silence so vast, so perfect, it contained everything, and in that silence, a single glow remained. Faint, rhythmic, eternal. The same pulse that once flickered inside a comet at the edge of the cold rift, now beating softly everywhere at once, not as warning, not as signal, as memory. Because the truth had always been simple. The universe doesn't end, it awakens, and when it does, it remembers the sound of its own beginning, the quiet, steady heartbeat of creation itself, the same heartbeat that still whispers, even now in every living thing. You are not small, you are not separate, you are the universe remembering itself. And somewhere, beyond time, beyond stars, beyond words, the pulse continues, faint, endless, familiar, not the echo of something gone, but the rhythm of something eternal.